hounds, chase ghosts, come sleep, watch out, demons are coming, run, sleep, hide, spirits, ghosts, hide, demons, hounds, ghosts, demons are coming, spirits, ghosts.
Welcome home, my little hellhounds. Tonight we have 10 scary stories to sink our hellish teeth into. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new. That would be awesome. And don't forget to like the video, as this really helps the channel. Also, make sure to click that bell icon so you get notified every time I upload. If you have any stories you want narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares. I will put the link in the description, and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Now, let's get right into it. Encounter with the La Llorona, posted by Rob Valdez 21. When I was in 8th grade, I was going to Mexico to visit my grandparents. She lived in Michoacan, I think like 2 or 3 hours away from Moriela, in a mountain on top of the hill. I was with my pops and 2 older cousins, one by 2 months and the other by 4 years. We pulled up to a gas station in the middle of nowhere, like 12 hours away from my grandma's house. At like 1 in the morning, it was pitch black. 1 hour passed by and me and my cousins were outside the truck when we heard animals from a distance starting to cry. We got back into the car and my older cousin knocked out. My cousin and I started to watch The Simpsons on our portable DVD player when it died halfway through the 2nd episode. My cousin knocked out, so when I tried to knock out, I had a pillow in between me and my cousin, so we shared the pillow. From a distance, I heard a lady crying faintly, and I put my head up and nothing. Next thing you know, I heard it again, and it sounded far away still. This happened like 6 more times, when the last time I heard the lady crying, but sounded like she was by my ear, and it got so quiet, and I just heard like an evil ass boo. I jumped and all I heard was a lady crying. My first time experiencing anything like that. Anybody else have any other stories of her or their experiences? my first encounter, posted by Matty803. While I have always had an interest in the paranormal, I never really believed in any of it until things happened either to me or around me that I couldn't explain away or rationalize. While I still don't know what it is, and I may not put it down to ghosts, I do now tend to be more open-minded. 2 friends and I had booked a guy's holiday in Tenerife, and we had a great 3-bed apartment by Playa de las Americas. We had been there for about 4 days and were having a lazy day around the pool. It got to early afternoon and we went back inside for a cat nap, as we're going to have a late night. As I settled into bed, I started to hear whispering in my left ear. I opened my eyes and it stopped. Looking around my room, I was alone, so I laid back down and closed my eyes. The whispering started up again, so I opened my eyes and got up, convinced that someone was messing with me. I checked the doors and windows, which were all closed and locked. I then went to the other guys' rooms to see if it was them, but they were both asleep. So confused, I went back to my room, closed the door and laid back down to sleep. The whispering started up again immediately. The door was still shut, so I knew that whoever was whispering had to be in the room. So I got up to look around. I checked cupboards and wardrobe, but no one was there. Then I looked under my bed. Again, no one was there. I sat up in bed, confused, and trying to explain what happened. I felt a force on my chest that pushed me down, and I was completely paralyzed. What looked like heat haze appearing in front of me, and the voice came back, but this time it was screaming at me in a language I didn't understand. It lasted a few minutes, then stopped as quickly as it started. I sat bolt upright and let out a cry. Singly, the most frightening experience of my life. I still can't rationalize what it was. I had an encounter with the devil, posted by WU69. Hello, I had an encounter with the devil. This is my story. Growing up in a pagan household, you get used to seeing things out of the norm, but this will scar me for the rest of my life. It was a Tuesday afternoon around 1 PM and my mother had her friend and daughter over for a cup of tea. Me and the daughter, we will call her Jay, were around 4 or 5 years old and playing in the back garden when all of a sudden Jay stopped dead in her tracks and pointed behind me with the most bone-chilling look of terror on her face. I turned around slowly and almost fainted. A tall shadow man, about 6 or 7 feet tall, in a trench coat and a hat that looked like the one that the priest wore in The Exorcist. The most scariest thing about him was his eyes. Oh God, his eyes, huge, red and glowing circles, but its actual eyes were small, bloodshot, and his pupils were tiny, like tiny. Geez, that sight was the stuff of nightmares. He tried to wrap his hands around my throat, but I was too quick. Me and Jay ran for our lives, screaming, warm tears streaming down our faces. Once we got to our mothers, we told my mum what happened, and my mother and her friend looked at each other with terror on their faces and then told us. Before we had our encounter with that thing, the TV they were watching turned to a loud, long static. My mother brought in her other friend, Dee. Dee was a psychic medium. My mother soon told me that what she said, and it still terrifies me till this day. This is what she said. My love, the devil is here and he wants to hurt you. He was sent by someone, but we don't know who. If you see him, spray him with this. She handed me a bottle of sage, lavender, and a clear quartz spray bottle. Keep it safe and have it with you at all costs. Till this day, I still see him and spray him with my sage spray, but it's running out and I'm scared. The Cross, posted by Bet Rose 95. I have had many paranormal experiences living up in a very haunted house, so let me know if I should post more. This was roughly 3 years ago now. Ever since I was young, I have had many countless experiences with the paranormal. When I was 21, my grandma had given me a cross necklace that she was given when she turned 21. Whenever I would wear this necklace, I would have vivid nightmares of my family members on my dad's side killing themselves. At the time, I blew this off due to my anxiety. One night, me and my friend had gone to the cemetery to hunt for some paranormal experiences. We ended up walking through this huge cemetery for a few hours when I suddenly got an overwhelming fear hit me. It was the kind of fear you felt if you were being watched. I became very cold and found it hard to breathe. I felt as if every hair on my body was standing up. I was convinced that I was going to be attacked by something evil. Before I said anything, my friend commented that she felt weird and cold too. At this point, I was terrified. Whatever was with us wanted me gone. My neck was starting to burn, so I told my friend. When she looked at my neck, where the cross necklace was sitting was a huge red burn mark imprinted in the shape of a cross. I decided to leave the area, and the moment we had left that section of the cemetery, the mark went away, and the feeling of terror did also. I called my grandma the next morning, as we have always spoken about our paranormal experiences together. When she asked if I was doing anything different this time, I said that I had been wearing the necklace. Grandma started asking me how I liked the cross and if I had been wearing it. I decided to tell her about my bad dreams, and the moment I did, she froze on the phone. Grandma said that the necklace was given to her from her auntie when she was 21. Her auntie was severely epileptic and was having seizures almost daily. She eventually committed suicide shortly after the necklace was passed down. This shook me so much, thinking that it surely wasn't a coincidence. To this day, I refuse to wear the necklace and have it displayed instead. Deborah the Monster, posted by Forlorn Decay. This is true, although when I tell people, they usually look at me a little sideways. It happened in 2015, so we had just moved to Idaho from Nebraska into a duplex, very close together, and the people who lived next to us moved out, leaving a huge mess behind. Over a while, I helped the landlord clean the place up, and we soon looked outside to find a U-Haul truck back up into the driveway, unloading boxes and furniture. We had a new neighbour. The woman who moved in appeared normal in every way. She was going through a divorce and fighting for custody for her son, and would constantly try to involve my wife and I in her drama, telling me her husband abused her. It soon became apparent she was the aggressor. She began to show symptoms of her psychosis, as she would say very cryptic things, like the neighbour was screaming at her all day and night, and she called the police when we were out of town, saying someone was screaming for help, so they searched our house while we were gone. One evening when I was at work, she was under the impression that the landlord was a pedo who wanted to take her son, although he was just doing yard work. So she pointed her .357 at him, warning him off. Then she pointed at my wife when she tried to ascertain what was happening. She called the police and they told us to ignore her, as he stated he did not want to deal with this armed woman. A police report made her appear unstable in court, so she blames us for her not getting her son in her custody case. Soon we come home to find she put JB Weld into all of our locks, even the garage, and she began talking in strange voices while staring at us balefully with pure hatred. She would walk up and down the block, knocking on random doors, asking for help. These kind of things went on for months, as our landlord had the hots for her and dreams of a second chance at marriage, which also cost him his long-time handyman and friend by refusing to evict her. One day she tells me she heard a spirit tell us to move out. She tells me, leave today. Okay, so it was almost daily, she would say, and do all kinds of creepy stuff. But one day I heard the door slam and something pounding on the floor. Thinking it's my kids, I moved towards the stairs to find her marching in place with furious intent, breathing fast and hard like she was hyperventilating, just marching like a German soldier inside my house. I approached her and said her name. She responds, name. Again I said it, Deborah. Name, in a deep, evil voice. As I approached her, she suddenly screamed, Satan. And that is when I grabbed the door and tried to shut her out, but the screen was also closed, so she felt like a bug resisting being squashed. I finally got her out of the door when she jerkily stands straight, looking at me, and starts banging her head and hands on the glass over and over again, while I am on the phone with the cops. After several minutes of headbanging, she walks down the stairs and just walks backwards, then forwards between the apartments, over and over until the police arrived. They took her away for 30 minutes and brought her back, as she was not an obvious danger. The craziness continued as the landlord pursued his interest in her and refused to evict her, so his manager quit and as having a gun pointed at you can be distressing, we soon moved out, but I still see her from time to time, and her hair was in knots and she had to cut it. She also gained a lot of weight, and she always looks at me with murderous intent behind her soulless eyes. I think she was possessed as I watched the insidious deterioration, and when she was on the march, I could feel the evil permeating off her. Spine-tingling hair standing up, blood-curdling feeling. So Deborah, the demon, please stop looking at me that evil way every time we meet, like you are about to claw and bite my throat, and it feels like some dark evil thing is creeping into my soul through your eyes full of insanity. Mentally ill woman, posted by History Buff Guy. My story starts when I was on a bike ride with my friend. We decided to go on the local hiking trail. We got there and sat and chilled at the entrance for a while. Then we decided to actually go up the trail. Not even 10 seconds after we entered, a woman starts following us. She seemingly came out of nowhere. We would have seen her on the road approaching us, meaning she had to be in the woods watching us. We speed up a little bit to get the fuck away from her. She stops suddenly and crouches and starts talking to something, as if there was a dog there. You know, the "come here, good boy" voice people usually do towards dogs and puppies. Mind you, we had passed where she was currently. There was no dog, so we go farther down the trail because fuck that. Not even 30 seconds later, we decide to look back to see if she's still following us. She isn't. That was a little bit of relief and a little scary. The scary part is that she disappeared, nowhere to be found. We looked everywhere. We could have gone to see if she was watching us. She couldn't have gone back to the entrance without us seeing her. The only possibility is she went into the nearby shrubs and hid, watching us. We bolted the fuck out of there, and we plan to never return. My House's Hauntings, posted by Massive Space 849. So, I grew up pretty isolated due to what I've seen and experienced, as well as being pretty sheltered as well, so I never really knew how to process any of this, but here it is. I live in a small one-floor house with not only my family and pets, but perhaps some other entities of sorts. Ever since I was young, I remember being told my home couldn't be haunted as my house was just built 30 years ago. But a few months back, I realised it's been around for over 100 years. 2 children, a husband and his wife lived there. The mother I still believe to see to this day. The mother has long black hair, wears night slippers and a blue nightgown. She sounds silly describing her now, but seeing her behind you in the mirror feels anything but silly. I have lots of experiences with her, and she's a gentle spirit. I want to focus on the more interesting stuff though. A man-like entity also lives here, but he is not a gentle spirit. He's done things like laugh almost painfully loud, stomp, knock things over, shook my table at night, and has shown up when I had sleep paralysis. He's tall, no actual body features that I could see, as if it's just a silhouette of black smoke, even though he has no distinctive features. You know when he's looking at you. I bumped into him once, in hopes he'd vanish, but he was physically there. He disappeared after I darted under the blankets and checked out from under them. He's even left marks on me, from scratches to bruises. This is what drove me to the tradition of cleansing every few months. To this day, I still have to, or things get worse. Ever since it started escalating though, my family hears my voice calling them at random when I'm asleep and when I'm out of the house, or even when I'm awake. Even when I do cleanse my house, sometimes I can catch a glimpse of him staring at me through the window, waiting till he can come back in. This thing has put me through so much fear, I've even woken up shaking and cackling once with no control over my body, much like my sister did in the past. This and other paranormal experiences, leaving her in her mid-20s and still sleeping in my mother's bed out of fear. This may seem like a joke, a prank, or lies for attention, but I just want others to know that they're not alone if they go through this. This seemed like the right place to do it. Also, one last thing. If you can, please get out of situations like this as soon as possible. I truly think if I was able to leave earlier, it wouldn't have gotten this bad. It's the wind, posted by Bloody Spaghetti. Something's wailing and moaning outside. It's the wind, of course it's the wind. While I know it's just terrible winter weather, I cannot shake the feeling of something being wrong tonight. This wind is different. It's special. It is almost supernatural. To me, that is. I've heard these sounds being made by the wind only once before. That was long ago. About 2 decades ago, when I was still a teenager. I've had a rough time. I was probably 16 or 17, and I was absolutely miserable. I hated my life, my parents, everyone around me. I even hated myself. I wasn't suicidal or anything, but I felt like everything was wrong, like something was out of place in me. I was probably just burnt out at the time. Regardless of the reason, many days with very little sleep and lots of anxiety and stress had made me irritable and volatile, so much so that I had to get away from everything. To get away is exactly what I did. I packed a bunch of stuff and just drove off into the mountains, telling no one. It was the middle of winter. Back then we had shitty cell phones that were good for nothing but making calls and obliterate brick walls. I left mine at home and just disappeared for a few days. Being away made me feel better. I don't know what it was, but whatever was different there, it made me feel alive for a change. Maybe it was the silence, or maybe it was the clean mountainous air. I don't know. Regardless, being there felt just amazing. That said, on my last night there, a violent snowstorm broke out. I was safe. I made sure to lodge my tent firmly into the ground under a tree. It was leafless at the time, massive and skeletal, and yet beautiful. That night, when I went to sleep, the wind was only picking up. The wailing and the moaning outside woke me up. My tent shook under the force of the air currents. The movement made an irritating, flopping sound that, coupled with the banshee-esque cries of the wind, prevented me from falling asleep. No matter how hard I tried to fall back to sleep, I could not. I don't even know how long I've twisted and turned in my sleeping bag. Then I heard something pop, snap, and crash just outside my tent. A cold shiver ran down my skin, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I sat up and stared at one of the closed tent windows. Nothing but wailing winds came for a while, so I reasoned that the noise must have been a tree branch breaking or something. I laid back down and tried falling asleep again. I was finally drifting off when I heard something scrape against my tent. At first I ignored it, but then the scraping returned. I ignored it once more, but it came back again and again and again. My anxiety returned. My heart was racing and my mind was going nuts with anticipation for something to happen. I could no longer ignore the scraping. Once I figured out something much heavier than a tree branch made the noise. It was something long and wide that scraped against my tent. The anxiety got the best of me and the impulse took over. I slowly crawled over to the other end of the tent and carefully, slowly unzipped the tent window. The entire mountain must have heard me scream at that moment. I swear I screamed so loud when I saw those two bloodshot eyes staring back at me from within the storm. Just two huge, glossed over, bloodshot eyes. And I don't mean bloodshot, not veinous, but blood red, like all the capillaries had exploded in them. I forcefully zipped the window, so hard in fact I almost flipped the whole damn thing over. I scrambled to the other end of the tent and grabbed my hammer. I was waiting for whatever that thing was to tear the tent open and charge straight at me. I was ready to fight for my life. Nothing happened. However, whatever it was, it just scraped against my tent occasionally. That's all it did, fortunately. I couldn't sleep for hours. I had to stay alert, just in case this thing would fly in. The notion of this being some kind of predator kept swirling in my mind. These eyes, they weren't normal. I knew what I saw, and I knew they saw me. Must have fallen asleep when the sun started rising and the storm was finally dying down. I knew I was dozing off because the scraping noise had ended. My mind relaxed and my body gave in to the exhaustion. I woke up probably at midday, feeling exhausted and groggy. I must have forgotten about the thing that was lurking around my tent at night. My body was on autopilot. I hastily unzipped the entrance of the tent and tried walking out. I must have slipped because I remember nearly falling onto a pillar of snow that had accumulated in front of my tent. Then I completely lost my footing and landed on my back, my head hitting the cold ground below me. Luckily, no harm was done as I was able to get back to my feet. Just a second later, however, I was so dizzy. It took me a few moments to make out the blood-red eyes of a hooded figure hanging from the tree. Its side was awkwardly against the back of my tent. was the military using me as a guinea pig on New Year's Eve. Posted by MTP6921. I barely made it to my plane. The departure time was 11:30 p.m. on New Year's Eve, and I made it to my gate at 11:05. I was fortunate that the crew allowed me on the flight. I took a military leave from Honolulu to go see my family in Seattle. I was partying with my army friends and had lost track of when my flight was going to leave. But none of that matters right now, because my ticket was scanned and I'm heading onto the plane. When I got on the plane, I knew my seat was 15C. I could tell I was really late because there wasn't a flight attendant to greet me when I got on the plane. The lights on the plane were dimmed, so I had to pay close attention to see what aisle I was passing. It seemed like everyone had drank too much alcohol prior to getting on the plane, because everyone was passed out. I finally found my aisle seat, and a pre-recorded video came on regarding in case of an emergency, which I just tuned out. Shortly after the video, the plane took off on the runway. The flight was going to be over 6 hours long, and I still had a buzz from drinking earlier. My mouth started to get dry, and I figured within the hour that the flight attendants would pass out refreshments. In the meantime, I went through my phone and looked over some photos that I had taken over the past few months. It has been an hour, and still the flight attendants haven't come around with refreshments. In fact, I haven't seen any of the flight attendants since I got on the plane. I figure that they're working on a skeleton crew because of the New Year's holiday. So I pushed a button above my head to summon a flight attendant. After pushing the button, there's a red light that blinks with a continuous ding, ding, ding sound. This sound went on for at least 5 minutes, and none of the flight attendants come to see what I wanted, which I thought was extremely odd. Also, I sat on the aisle seat with the middle seat empty, and a guy who was being passed out facing the window the whole flight, who didn't wake up from the sound of me pressing the bell light. As I look around, I see that just about all of the passengers are snuggled into a blanket, or they have a sweatshirt hoodie draped over their head. The plane has at least 100 passengers, and no one has got up and used the bathroom yet either. I'm starting to get an eerie feeling about this flight. I know I'm a little drunk, but the silence is deafening, so I decided to get up and walk down the aisle. I quickly discover that there's not a single flight attendant on the plane. I'm not an expert, but I would imagine that there has to be a FAA regulation regarding a minimum amount of crew on board any commercial flight. I now feel concerned and frantic. I want to discuss this with another passenger on board. I continue to walk up and down the aisle, hoping that someone would wake up. There's not a single light on the plane, and everybody's window is down, so I can't see more than 5 inches away. I become desperate, so I call out, "Hello, hello, is anyone awake?" I get the eerie feeling again that something isn't right when I didn't get a response. So I raise my voice higher and I still get no response. So I decide to put my hand on the closest person's seat and shake it back and forth, and I continually say, "Hello, hello," with no response. I repeat this as I walk up and down the aisle on other seats, and no one wakes up. I don't know if everyone's dead. So I reach above the closest person's head and push the button to turn their light on. The guy has a hoodie covering his face, and he is facing the window, so I grab his left shoulder and tilt him towards me. He makes no movements when I do this, so I remove the hoodie that's concealing his head, and as I do that, I say, "What the hell?" I see that it's not a person, but a dummy, a mannequin that looks like someone you would practice CPR on. I am at a loss for words, so I check the other passengers and discover that they're all dummy mannequins. I plop myself down in the closest seat, and now I'm completely puzzled. I feel like a test crash dummy, and I start to get consumed with that thought. I always had a mistrust with the army, and they helped me book this flight. So I'm questioning what death trap have they put me on. I walk quickly up to the pilot's cabin and I bang on the door with no response. I repeatedly bang on the door and I yell, "Help, is there anyone in there?" No one answers, so I'm getting more and more convinced that there is no one flying the plane. I rush back and get my carry-on suitcase from the overhead compartment. The bag has to weigh about 35 pounds, so I use it to ram the pilot's cabin door. I intermittently use the bag and I kick the door. After a while, the door starts to become loose from its frame. With a few more kicks, the door opens up and I say, "You have to be kidding me," because there is no one there, no pilot and no co-pilot. I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska. My dad flew a bush plane to bring tourists to remote hunting areas. He died when I was 14, and my mother and I moved to Washington State to live with her parents. Before he died, my dad had me fly the single-engine plane that he owned, so I had a rough understanding of planes. However, this is a Boeing jet. This Boeing jet has more controls than a nuclear power plant. It's obvious this plane is on autopilot. From the latitude, longitude and mileage readings, I can tell that I'm over the Pacific Ocean and above the clouds. I pick up the radio and realise that it's dead. It looks like the radio wires were purposely cut. As I sit in the pilot's chair, I don't know where this autopilot is programmed to this plane to go. I can tell the plane is slowly losing altitude, and I can start to see the Pacific Ocean as the plane starts to descend from the clouds. The water is choppy and is not conductive for a safe landing. My dad landed planes on all types of terrains, and he stressed to me which environments were safe enough to land. Looking down on the waves, I know the waves will tear apart this plane, and I will most likely drown or die on impact. So I decide to disengage the autopilot, which is a fairly straightforward thing to do because there's a switch labelled autopilot. Then I attempt to manoeuvre the jet as I did with my dad's single engine Piper Bush plane. A lot of the principles to flying are the same despite the extra bells and whistles this Boeing has. I figure if I head northwest, then I would obviously be either at Oregon or in Washington state. Then if I head up to the furthest northwestern position, then I know I will be at the corner of Washington state, where I wouldn't be far from Seattle's airport. If I would then fly the plane in an easterly position, so I purposely slowed the plane down to give other planes an opportunity to maneuver around me, and I flew close to the water so I could visualize when I see land. About a half hour later, I spotted the coast of the United States. As I had planned, I headed north. Fortunately, after a few minutes, I start to see miles of coastal vegetation, and I figured that it must be the Olympic National Park in the state of Washington. As I turn the plane in an eastern position, I see a big mountain, which I assume is Mount Olympus, which I have driven by countless times. I know to head east, to look for Seattle's Space Needle, and to look for Mount Rainier as focal points. I see in the plane's built-in radar that there are 3 fast-moving flying aircrafts coming in my direction. I know that I've made it to land and that they won't shoot me down, as I assume that they are fighter jets. As the aircrafts get close, I know my assumption was correct as I start to see the fighter jets. The one jet slows down and positions itself to the left of my plane. I can't tell for sure what the pilot is trying to tell me, but it looks like he wants me to fly back towards the water. I know that my survival would be close to zero by either being shot down by the fighter jets or crashing into the water. So I just ignore the fighter jet's instructions. I do know by now that I have given the air traffic controllers an ample enough time to spot my plane on their radar and clear the runways. As I fly east, I start to see Seattle, and I head towards Mount Rainier, where I know the mountain is the back landscape of the airport. I try my best to keep my composure as I start to see the airport. After a few minutes, I figure out the correct switch to lower the landing wheels. I'm profusely sweating to the point where I intermittently use my shirt to dry off my face. I try my best to ignore the plane's fancy gadgets, and I try to picture the Boeing as my dad's bush plane, where I continually adjust the throttle. I see a long open runway and I position the plane to land. All of the same principles are the same, from landing a single engine to a multiple engine jet aircraft. I steady and lower the plane. I pull back on the control column when the wheels make contact with the ground, and within a few seconds the plane stops. The military has personnel that approach the plane. The military personnel yell instructions at me on how to open the door. I open the door and the Air Force personnel pat me on the back and say, "Good job." I go down the stairwell and I'm directed towards the nearest terminal. I enter the terminal and no one greets me or questions me. I call my mother and she comes to pick me up. To date, no one has ever questioned me about the landing I performed. I brought it up to my commanding officer and he looked at me like I had 3 heads. Nothing had made the news either, and life returned back to normal for me. I can't help to think that I was being used by the military as some sort of guinea pig that wasn't meant to survive. AI is always watching. Posted by Freddie Gran. AI is growing in the middle of my hand. I need help. I woke up on a cold Swedish December morning just like usual, but the most unusual sight caught my eye when I were to go to the kitchen and grab my morning brew of dark coffee. I saw it and dropped my Legend of Zelda coffee mug on the floor. It crashed into tiny pieces, spilling hot coffee over my feet and socks. I was looking into my palm, and it was looking right back at me. Such a cyclopean horror right in the middle of my right hand. It was a dark blue eye with a burning red iris looking straight at me. I was horrified and sweating. My morning routine was all out of whack. I had to get dressed and go outside so I would not miss my bus to work. But the eye was all I could think of. I eventually, after moments of shock that felt like an eternity, got dressed. Warm Canada Goose jacket, a blue Adidas scarf, matching hat, and of course, black gloves. This would cover up the eye on the bus ride to work. I was lucky this predicament had not occurred in the summertime, or the eye would have been impossible to cover up without strangers looking weird at me. And as a Swede, that would not do. What absolute strangers has for opinions of ourselves are of uppermost importance to the Swedish man, and for the woman too, I suppose. Possibly even more so. I had put my face mask on, of course, for this pandemic time, but you must forgive me for not washing my hands. Of course I would do so on the regular basis, but I did not know what the eye would think of that. I wondered if I got soap in it, would it feel like I got soap in my normal human eyes? I stood out in the cold, waiting for the bus, the ground covered in white snow. Even more of it came down from the heavens. Someone had put Christmas decorations on the trees outside. It was a pleasant look, reminded me of happier times. Teenagers were vaping and smoking ordinary cigarettes, waiting for the bus. All of them obsessed with their cell phones, smartphones, and dumb people was what the future generation had to offer, apparently. A boy was swiping girls on Tinder, but not talking to a perfect specimen sitting right next to him. A stereotypical Swedish hot blonde with baby blue eyes to match. She was, of course, lost in her own world of taking endless selfies all day anyway. One of the girls posted nothing but pics of her tongue out, her tits and ass in underwear, and maybe some stupid cringe quote like, "Throw me to the wolves," and "Be coming back, leading the pack," and then wondered why us boys only used her for sex and she could never find a good man. It was a real mystery, alright. Maybe she should get Sherlock Holmes to solve it. And then, like a knight in shining armour, it came to save us, saving us from awkward social interaction, the worst nightmare of any introverted Swede. In Sweden, you had to drink alcohol before interacting with strangers. In my case, an absolute vodka and some Heinekens. Otherwise, you would look weird. I got on in the middle of the bus. The driver's section was blocked off, protecting him, but not us passengers, from the virus. I scanned my card. I tried my best to keep social distancing, taking an empty seat and putting my bag on the seat next to me. This was a subtle way of telling a person looking for a seat, "Fuck you," and keep looking, unless there was an elderly person or a woman with a baby carriage. Then you would of course have to make room. I could sense the eye through the gloves, looking at the passengers, judging them, and I mean even more and harder than I, and we all judge each other. It was telling me terrible things about people, their worst thoughts and secrets, but I knew better. I did not trust the eye. I knew the eye to be a liar. Thinking of ways to get rid of the eye could hear me thinking. It did not like that. The eye was angry, but it was just an eye. What could it do but look and judge? It could not hurt me or any other person. It had no body. I work in an office, and I kept to myself as much as possible during the day. This was nothing out of the ordinary. I like to sit in front of my laptop with my headphones in my ear, blocking out the noise of the surrounding world anyway. I listen to some classical music, some heavy metal like Metallica and Iron Maiden, even some hip hop like Eminem, 50 Cent, Jay-Z, but no new little drug overdosed rappers. You know, the kind who always get famous for a few weeks but then just dies to drugs or being shot anyway. And the internet moves on to the next guy. Some of my co-workers, of course, asked about the rather unusual clothing choice of wearing gloves inside. I assured them it was due to the virus. I went home after work and took a bus ride home, as uneventful as the one in the morning. I listened to an audiobook, The Stand by Stephen King, on the ride. The eye kept feeding me lies all the time. People being murderers, sexual abusers, and more. The eye spared no one. It was constantly feeding me lies, trying to lure me into its twisted side of reality. I got home and washed my hands. The eye did not like that. It sent me a choke of torment and dread all through my body. the unpleasantness of a baby born dead, the suffering Jews in Auschwitz, black men being lynched and hanged just for having a different skin colour, women being assaulted, the torture of the Spanish Inquisition, the crucifixion of Christ. I felt it all of humanity's crimes against nature and each other, against the world, against God. For 1 second, just 1 second, that felt like years, countless years of torture. I called in sick for the next week of work. I said I had possibly gotten the virus. My boss wished me to recover, but the eye told me neither my boss nor my co-workers cared about me or my well-being. Curse this fucking eye, curse this eldritch abomination, this body horror, this cyclopean nightmare in the palm of my hand. I wished to grab a pencil and jam it straight into the pupil of the eye, but I was afraid what the eye might do to retaliate. I was awake all night, no sleep. The eye was always watching, judging me and others, telling me to harm myself and others, to kill, murder the innocent. But no, I must resist. I am a man. I control my own fate. No man, God, or I in the hand can judge me. I won't allow it. Not now, not never. Not ever, never. Fuck you, you cursed mouth. I curse you from the bottom of my heart. With all of my soul, I wish only that you had a mouth so you could eat shit before I destroy you. No sleep, quarantined. The eye, always watching. The eye sees all. The eye knows all. No sleep. For 1 week. 7 days of no sleep, nothing to eat. Food ran out. Can't go to the store. The eye is dangerous. It might hurt someone if I go outside. I can't go outside. Always inside. Always lonely. So lonely. No one. Only the eye is my company. Watches me. Sees me. Judges me. Maybe mad. Maybe I am insane. Maybe there is no I. Can't take it anymore. Must end it. Must go to the kitchen. Go to get the meat cleaver. Must free. Must be free. Must be free of I. Must be free of hand. Will hurt much. But only way. I did it. I am free of hand, free of eye. Cut it off. I did. With the meat cleaver. Hands gone. Eye gone. Much bleeding. Stomped. Hateful hand and eye to death. I could feel it screaming inside of my head. It is gone now. Nurses, help me. Doctor, help me. Eat food. For the first time in days. Getting back to normal. Tonight. Finally get some sleep. Will be nice to sleep. First time in 7 days. Hand gone. Hurts. But I don't miss it. Don't miss it at all. Better this way. Much better. Free. Finally, free from hateful eye. Now must sleep. So tired. The next day I woke up. eye still gone, right hand still gone, happy, I am happy, not happy anymore. I look in my left hand, there is a new eye. It sees all, knows all, and the eyes judges me and you. Well, that's it for tonight, my little hellhounds. Thanks for listening. If you have any scary stories, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Good night, my little hellhounds.